Hi there, Tori here. I hope you're doing well. Today I have a speed painting process for you and I will take you through the whole thing. I am painting one of my really nice memories that happened during my uni time. So I started with a simple value sketch because I find this method the most useful during painting environment. It allows you to focus on the shapes and the composition. Of course, since I'm painting one of my memories, I already knew that the main focal point will be my friend and the leaning tree. So I tried to have a background that will not steal the focus from that. I did only 2 sketches because I had a general idea of how this scenery looked like. I am still learning to do nice compositions, so this painting isn't anything crazy, but I think it's good enough because it's fairly simple and I didn't want to overcomplicate it. My main goal here was to have this kind of serious, gloomy atmosphere contrasting with my friend being silly. Once I had my sketch done, I traced over the main planes with a selection tool, and this way I created for myself 5 layers. The background, the forest, the cliff, the foreground and the objects, which are the tree and my friend. Before I start painting on the layers, I usually just create another layer on top of it and try out the overall color palette. Then when I'm satisfied, I apply that layer to each one of the planes and start refining it. I use separate layers and paint within the clipping mask because that way I can still easily manipulate the layers in case something looks wrong. I think it gives you more control, but at the same time it can get quite chaotic. Since this painting, as I mentioned, has a simple structure, it was easy to do it that way. So to give you a little bit of a backstory, at the time we left the uni building with our professor to do some research outside. It's been freezing cold and we were walking around for a long time. Our main goal was to climb a pretty high hill from where we could see the whole city and on one side and a cliff with a forest on another. And I remember it being really gloomy and the sky was grey with sun not showing anywhere, and at some point it started to snow as well. Painting from memory or painting memories can be quite tricky because you obviously lack the clearness of the image, so there's a lot of details that you don't remember, and at the same time, if you remember the details, you might want to stay true to them. And that was definitely something I had to watch out for, because after all, I'm painting an art piece and I wanted to work without any backstory and still be engaging to the viewer. So you want to leave enough context, but at the same time filter the details that don't really matter. So for example, I had some photos from that day, and right behind the tree where the ground goes down, there was a fence. But it looked quite ugly, and I think it will be an element that wouldn't really work with what I'm trying to say with this painting, and it will probably also destroy the composition, so that's why I didn't include it. And the very same goes for the color palette. It isn't really matching just because it will be boring if I painted it exactly like it was in the photos. So the grass was greener and the background was more grey, but it's a color palette that wasn't really doing anything. Like, you get the idea of it being gloomy, but I'm painting a memory, so I want it to be a bit over the top because that's how we usually remember things. Anyway, when I'm painting landscapes like this, I often paint everything too big and then I have to keep on making it smaller. There is this one sentence that I keep on repeating to myself while I'm painting. Actually, Greg Mullins said that. I remember watching a video of him saying that when he paints, he thinks big shapes first and then he thinks of small shapes when he's refining the painting. Honestly, when I heard that, I was like, yeah, duh, obviously you do that. You can't really do it other way around, can you? But there was some very valuable advice there. What I think he really meant was the shapes and overall feeling. So he is the very reason why you don't see me zoom in on the painting a lot in the first stages of the painting, actually all the way till refining stage, because I'm not concerned about painting every little piece of grass. What concerns me first is that if you've got only 2 seconds to look at this painting, that during that time you would understand that in the very front there is some grass and snow without having to think about it, and the same goes for the cliff and the forest behind it. In those 2 seconds you'd understand that there is some nature in the background that's not really important, because what's important is the human figure and the tree. I think Greg Mullins said that very thing in that video, and it turns out I just had to think this through. And it's just funny how I completely dismissed what he said, and now it's a rule that I live by. By the way, if you don't know who Greg Mullins is, then you have some homework to do. He's Absolutely an amazing painter and such an inspiration. I highly recommend analyzing his paintings because he's a master of hinting objects without actually painting them in detail. And his paintings make so much sense and make no sense at all at the same time. So back to the painting. Of course, I try to emphasize that the cliff and the forest are far away and I don't want it to be too much in the way of focus. So the colors I used are really washed out, and even if I added darker colors, I still washed it out with a big soft brush. I added more white to the bottom of the cliff to separate those two layers, so the foreground and the middle ground will be clear when one is ending and where the other one is starting. And so near the end, as I mentioned, I started really to zoom in and add those little details and clean up a little the mess that I created. At first, I thought that I'd add the details to the forest as well, but to be frank, I forgot. But at the same time, you know, I could have gone back and added those details, but I don't think it's necessary because I don't really want the viewer to pay close attention to that. The only thing that matters is that the viewer will get sense of the forest being there. I really think it's important to simplify certain moments in the painting because your job as a painter is to guide someone's eyes to the main subject. If you overflow them with information, they just might get lost. So painting grass used to really intimidate me, but I had some projects where I had to paint a lot of fields and I did my research on how to do that, and now I'm happy to say that I'm way more comfortable with this subject. I usually will paint the ground with 2 or 3 colors just to start with big shapes. So where's the light, where's the shadow, where's the snow in this case, and then I use that ground as a guide of where the grass with this color should be. So it usually just comes down to overlapping different colors of the grass. And that's again why it is important to paint the big picture first. It is way easier to go into detail after you have this big picture, and it's definitely less intimidating. Also, when I tried to figure out how to paint grass, I used to look at a lot of paintings with grass and analyze how other artists dealt with it. And to be fair, I still do it to this day. Right now, just before I opened Photoshop, I searched up paintings of winter because I wanted to see what colors other artists use and how they approach this topic. I think it kind of inspires you to paint. It gives you more ideas on how to approach your own painting, and it helps you visualize better what you have in mind. Doing a little research like this on artworks and photos is really helpful in the painting process. From the very beginning, I knew that there is going to be 2 versions of this painting, with one where there is a figure facing the cliff and another one where he pretends that he's bending the tree. I think it's just a fun addition to the piece, and I also wanted kind of to capture that moment where we've been focused on the research, but at the same time we had those fun moments of joy and silliness. And also, you know, I just wanted to make the story clear, so I think that 2 paintings complement each other pretty well. I had a bit of a problem there to capture that pose, but I managed to do it in the end. So the level of refining that you want to take your painting to varies depending on your intention and your style. My style is messy, as you can see, so I often don't bother to render too much. If you grasp the feeling, it's enough for me. And at the end, I also adjusted the color palette a little bit just because I like the blue in the back. And just before I saved it, which I didn't record, I actually brought the cliff and the forest a bit lower so that the figure will be more clear. And there again, why having everything on separate layers can be very handy, because I didn't even have to adjust the sky or fix the foreground. So that's awesome. So here are the finished paintings. I had really fun painting this actually. I think that a lot of people just search for this crazy cool stories that they could paint and try to, come up with like cool concepts. But sometimes it's just a matter of looking for the stories within ourselves and what we experienced, and sometimes you can leave it as it was, like me, or you can take it to the next level. So yeah, Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this as much as I did, and if you did, please like and subscribe to this channel. I post videos about digital painting and a bit about animation, but I'm still searching for my unique voice, so feedback is always welcome. Have an amazing day, happy painting, and I will see you next week. Bye bye!